Welcome in, Arizona Cardinals fans, to the Redbird Reboots. We have your co-hosts are back together today here with me at Blake Murphy 7 and at Pancake Soul Marcos Labrada. Guys, Cardinals are entering the final 2 weeks of the season. It's a big week. We'll talk a lot about the state of the Cards, about where they're picking. We got some Marco Wilson news as well. But before we get into that, Marcos, your holiday season, was it good this year? Was it bad because of the Cardinals game on Christmas Eve that we got to do our fun little kind of live podcast breaking down a lot was happening in real time with the Cards? How are you doing overall?
I'm doing good. I hope everybody had a great holiday and a great and safe holiday. Apparently, there's this bug that was going on, and I mean, our quarterback right now is having symptoms of a holiday bug as well. Not sure if that's going to keep him out of the game or not. I don't believe that's going to be the case, and I don't think he's going to keep himself out of it. But as far as everybody, I hope everybody had like a safe and safe holiday. And if they did get sick and get the bug, make sure you take care of yourself. Make sure that you are, not overtaxing your body because that can really hinder yourself. But I mean, other than that, I hope everybody had a great holiday. And of course, Blake, I hope you had a great holiday as well.
Yeah, it's a fun time, Marcos, at least to be able to actually have not just time to sit back, relax, and watch some football games, but then to be able to open presents at the same time, too, which is just really fun. A lot of, I know, with Cardinals fans this year were hoping for a present on Christmas Eve against the Chicago Bears. That did not end up happening, unfortunately. The Arizona Cardinals actually lose to the Bears, and it was not even close, unfortunately. The Cardinals seemed to make it interesting at the uh, start of the second half by holding Chicago to 6 points, but it was that second quarter with two touchdowns given up that really just had this 21-0 lead from Chicago. Cardinals did get to score a touchdown that kind of made it a bit closer, but in the end, it felt like that they were two different teams at two different points in time. It was a game in which where the Bears didn't have a lot of their receiving weapons and yet still were able to move the ball on Arizona downfield. Cole Kmet had 107 receiving yards before leaving the game. Khalil Herbert in place of I think it was Donta Foreman. There wasn't as many carries, I think, for Roshan Johnson, but Herbert did just get 20 carries, averaged over 5 yards a pop with one touchdown. Kyler Murray protected the ball well, threw for about 230 yards. It did throw for two touchdowns. They did actually get an interception of Justin Fields on the goal line, which helped keep Arizona in it. But at the end of the day, Marcos, this was a game that just was all Chicago up front through the first half. And really, Arizona was not able to overcome that first half deficit, whether on offense or and being able to get enough takeaways in the second half defensively to catch up, and they drop a game in the cold in Chicago, which puts them now in a 3-12 record. They are now 1-7 on as the away team this year. Just has been a rough year for Cardinals fans, and that did not end on Christmas.
No, I just continued on. I mean, I'm not sure if we expected this before the season even started. I think a lot of us were marking this as a win, especially if we knew that Kyler Murray was coming back. So for us to like go up against the Chicago Bears and actually face reality where they jumped to like a 21 point lead, and it was like the Cardinals had definitely no consistency on offense. They looked like they were figuring things out at some point, and then they just kind of curled back into their, three and out system of just not being able to figure out how to move the ball like with big chunk plays or any type of chunk plays in general. And the defense, as you know, what we've seen is like they give up these leads, and at some point they do seem to clamp down. But I'm not sure if that's more so a product of like, hey, we clamped down because we figured out, how to be able to stop their concepts more so than just teams just going lackadaisical, starting to hand off the ball. The Cardinals knowing that that's what they're going to do. They're going to try to eat up the clock. So it's one of those situations where, we can't really even figure out if the defense is really even finding answers or if the teams are just starting to let off the gas pedal.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a place where at least it felt like coming into the game that because Arizona's been so bad against the run, They were 31st against the run coming in. They're a good rushing defense, but the Bears were the top run defense. We did at least still see Arizona be able to have sometimes they were effective in running the ball, but after a while it became pretty clear they were not going to be able to actively run it on Chicago the same way. James Conner had 12 carries for 45 yards. It's about under 4 yards a carry. So it's not terrible. It's not like it's like, 2 yards a carry, but you really needed to make plays in the passing game. That was something that Arizona's line were not able to block very well with Montez Sweat and some good defensive linemen up front. There were some areas as well where we got to see in some of these early downs, they just got in a little bit of trouble. We got a quick clip here, at least, that we'll be able to break down of just showing one of the areas, at least, we've seen from Arizona this season, which has been in keeping Kyler Murray clean in the pocket and Kyler being able to have his weapons. You've got the likes of Trey McBride, essentially, is going to be one of the players that's set up there. You've also got Michael Wilson, Rondale Moore, and, of course, the number 0, Zach Pascal. And you can see here in this play, the Bears do a good job of ultimately, this is just essentially dropping back and being able to have mostly a quarters coverage is what it looks like, with each guy kind of playing that zone over there for which the player who runs into each of those. You can see at least here that there's a pretty free release, at least overall, for Trey McBride. His route ends up taking him a little bit into that coverage, but some of that also, I think, at least by the design, is you're in a second and slightly long situation. Kyler does actually look for that guy over the middle, kind of pump fakes it, does end up taking a sack. And when we take a look here at the end zone view, you can really at least see that he is going to kind of not have as much. He doesn't trust what he's seeing with James Conner underneath there, and then ends up getting tripped up at least with his own guy. Much better view here from the other end zone. You're able to at least see here where the play is just trying to kind of get a little bit closer to the sticks. He just doesn't really trust what he's seeing between James Conner and Michael Wilson there on the coverage. I honestly feel like that in one of the plays like this, what you'd like to be able to see is guys being able to pick up some of these different stunts that are happening. Like you see James Conner is kind of there in pass protection. Michael Wilson looks like he at least has the linebacker. Edmonds is just kind of running right into the coverage there. And this is one of those places where part of some of these plays, Marcos, I think, is you're trying to run a play and not just see who can get open, but being able to at least have the ability just to take the check down. You don't want to take a sack here. What do you feel like at least was was there a correct thing to have on this play? Because I feel like what we were really wanting to see here was, this feels like it was a play designed to get Michael Wilson open on this side here. You're trying to put stress at least on the defense by having another guy you can pick up a couple first downs, and then having a safety check down in James Conner, all kind of in the same area. These 3 defenders are being occupied by the 2 receivers here, so you're at least looking at this being a spot where you're at least hoping to read your coverage from high to low. I think that he's looking for Michael Wilson here. Wilson is clearly in a spot where there's a good coverage here with Chicago.
The tight
They're at least
window.
not, yep, and they're at least making it where normally you'd say, all right, well, they're keeping that too tight of a window. You either can try to go on the outside leverage here, or you can take the check down here in the spot. Kyler just does not like what he sees, at least. He pump fakes. Probably at least you can say is if he was reading from outside in, you can see the receiver at the top is kind of ready, waiting for the ball. Here's a good spot where you just want to kind of see if I'm not going to pick up anything, I can just loft it to James Conner, see if he can make a man miss or run it over, live to fight another down. You also don't want to throw a pick by throwing it over the guy's head or tipping it. Sometimes it's even better just to kind of see if you can throw it into the dirt, come back on 3rd and 10, not take a sack. He ends up at least kind of, I think, getting stepped on a little bit by Humphreys before he's about ready to kind of see if he can bail. He doesn't go backwards out of the pocket, which I think is kind of helpful. I'll move back to the Kyler down here where you can at least see. And this is one of like the stories of like the first half was Bears at least are getting a little bit of pressure over there up the middle. Kyler obviously is trying to throw over to this level here. He's holding the safety in the middle of the field, trying to keep it with Michael Wilson. Not able to do it. He kind of tucks the ball here. They've collapsed the pocket around him. This is one of those places where a lot of quarterbacks would probably be able to throw over the guy right here through this hole. You can see at least here be able to hit someone like a James Conner. He instead kind of tucks it, and then he ends up just losing his balance, falling backwards a bit, takes the sack versus trying to run. And this is something that would happen more likely with guys who are able to tear their ACL. He's not backing up or having the exact same escapability. You can even see here, he's wondering, can I run through with that hole? And then he has a stunt that's on there with the one guy. He's just kind of in the pocket right now. So this is the spot where you need to either stand and deliver. And I think some of this is just a place of needing to have the protection be in a good place. He steps back and you can see he just kind of loses balance, falls backward on the ball. Arizona kind of gives up at least and just runs the ball on 3rd and 18, puts themselves in a punt with a good position at least with that. The next spot I think at least here that we'll have is you got a couple of places where he wasn't as helped unfortunately on some future downs. They're able to at least work on running the ball up in the middle. But this is like here at the 1st and 10. You're down by 7. You get the ball back. You have a nice play designed to Trey McBride. And you can at least see you got the play action fake, turns his back to the defense. You can see how Rondale at least is pulling one of the um, defenders that was there, kind of pulling around, seeing if you know the run. They're not necessarily fooled by that. So this defender who's looking right here at James Conner instead of being pulled up to Rondale, he actually gets Trey McBride on the over with the safeties being preoccupied by Michael Wilson. Got a nice little play there. He gets open and comes a little bit back inside, throws either a little bit behind Trey, at least also has a chance to make the catch and does not. This was the story, I think, of some of the first half was where you would get a good play dialed up, and whether it was being a second behind by Kyler or a guy going and getting a chance at the ball and dropping it, offense just was not able to click in that first half, Marcos, and that's part of what led to that 21-7 start for Arizona in the first half.
Yeah, when I was watching the All 22, I had to look over it a few times because one of the things that I noticed is he's hitching a lot and his footwork is not all the way there. That's why it's so important that this offseason goes the way it goes. And I've, stayed consistent with people and told them, I don't think that there's a question that Kyler Murray isn't going to be our quarterback in 2024 because even at this point, evaluating him is going to be kind of tough because he's got a lot to do when it comes to like footwork and when he gets to the top of his drop there's even timing having to do with like how quick does he get to his drop, so sometimes he has to
Right.
like maybe slow himself down because he needs those plays to develop so when he does get to the top of his drop those reads are available and then he can make his decision. But that's why I constantly emphasize and I emphasize that he needs protection up front because when you showcase that first play and you showed the end zone angle, that front part was starting to collapse on him. And so that's what caused him to like kind of pull the ball back and not release it because then his vision started getting distorted, it started coming down. He had his read, but he wasn't confident in throwing it. Not only that, but he's had a few balls getting batted over the middle. So then he didn't trust releasing that ball. And then you mentioned that there was a wide open gap. He was thinking for a split second to take that gap until they
Yep.
stunted over, defensive tackle clogged that lane up, and it was just donezo at that point. So that protection up front is like very important when it comes to like not only just protecting Kyler Murray, but giving him a better chance to be able to have better passing lanes and more space to work with, so that way he can hopefully anticipate where his receivers will be coming up. Because on that play by Michael Wilson was attacking that middle part of the field on that because it was a middle field open coverage. So he needs to drop it in there with timing, and the timing isn't there because he doesn't have the vision for it or the protection for it. Then that's gonna ruin the play. And
Right. And that's where
and on that,
what I do love though is they've at least been able to get Kyler into these under center looks. They've been able to at
mm-hmm,
least create a bit more of a pocket for him by not necessarily having the defenders, they're having to still guard against the run. That's created enough space for Trey McBride to be able to actually get a step on the defenders. You can at least see here, and this is one of the things I think is unfortunate about this play in particular is this feels like it's a drop by McBride because if you're a quarterback throwing the ball and you at least get the ball in your hands, two hands should normally equal one catch. It's not leading him in front. It's a little bit like on his helmet, but again, it's not like he threw it behind Trey McBride to the point where McBride's like, that is something that you'd say should be a catch. He's clearly got the arm outstretched. It is a good play by the defender to play through the ball, but it does look like McBride just kind of is not able to get there. One of the other things I think that's helpful is we still can see how they've been able to incorporate zone read plays for Kyler Murray that make use of his legs. So here you got the run game. They obviously are playing, looking for Montez Sweat coming off of the edge. Oh, not Sweat. Sweat's over on the Oh, sorry,
Oh,
this is number
that
93. Yeah, he's off to the side, I think, at least on the sideline, perhaps for a snap. But right here, they're at least
yeah.
putting the defender into conflict. He's having to guard if Kyler's going to keep it and run up the middle, or guard if James Conner's going to run on the outside. Kyler's reading his footsteps. You can see right here, he is playing too far leveraged inside, so he's able to hand it off to James Conner. Conner is able to get the edge. You can see here that Higgins, he's the young tight end who's having to take over for Jeff Swaim now. And he does a good job with, I think, some of the effort in blocking, but he doesn't get a good enough block, at least, where he's able to fully spring Connor, and Connor actually runs into him in the back, trying to push him in front. And that just kind of like still gets the first down, but this is one of the places, at least when it comes to not just talent, is like he was more of this primarily receiving tight end who now they're developing into being a better blocker versus this is Jeff Swaim outside. Swaim is one of he's like your prime blocking tight end. He'll be able to at least probably lock it up, and you'll may be able to see Connor actually have a shot to get the edge here and pick up a couple extra yards. There's, I think, opportunities that you can see with this offense because you can see pieces of it clicking, Marcos, but it's not necessarily all coming together. And that's a big reason why Arizona is still. Last 3 years, I think someone put up a stat that said on Christmas Day, when the Cardinals have more guys hurt, when more people are injured, they don't have the same depth as other teams do to stay in some of these games. They've only put up 16 points the last 3 years in a row on their Christmas game. It's been 16, 16, 16. The offense is something where it's not necessarily going to carry the team, but we can see fully that whatever the defense did provide in the second half, with the Bears not able to put them away, the offense was not able to take advantage of it. And that's something that I do feel like teams are recognizing. This isn't a one side of the ball issue for Arizona or a guy's getting healthy. This is part of a full rebuild, and it's going to be interesting to see what Arizona does in the offseason.
Yeah. I think it's pretty clear that, like, especially since I'm not sure if there's ever even been depth with Steve Keim as general manager, but the depth has been pretty much atrocious when it comes to like knowing that, like, hey, you're pretty much top heavy, and we all know if you're a top heavy team, once that cracks, it's just game over from there. We're only as good as our backups at this point because we can't keep anybody healthy. Like it's been the case for the Cardinals. I can't even remember when was the last time we actually had depth except for like the 2014 season, which was
Mm-hmm.
like basically like next man up season.
Yep.
So it's a daunting task to go forth in this offseason to see what pieces we can get and what pieces can we also bring in and develop.
Yep. No, totally agree. Let's talk at least a little bit about with the quarterbacks in this game. We talked with Timmer in Chicago as a decision to make. We also talked with EJ Snyder, who is of a bootleg football podcast, and Bears Over Beers, and he felt like that the Bears were just looking to move on, that there was not just league pressure, whether internal pressure. What are your thoughts, at least, with seeing Justin Fields? Because a lot of Cardinals fans are looking at the draft and are saying, all right, right now, the Bears have the Panthers pick. There's almost a 96% chance that they'll get that first pick. We'll talk a little more about the 4%. I think it's actually 94 and 6%. Either way, it's negligible. We'll talk a bit about the opportunity that Arizona would have, but let's talk a bit about, do we see the Bears after this game making a decision of confidence in Justin Fields to move forward? Maybe they would take a Marvin Harrison Jr. first overall or trade back from the number one pick. Maybe you look at a team like Washington, trade back with them, and suddenly Arizona's in a spot of, ooh, Bears are right behind us picking. Washington's going quarterback. Do you feel like you're going to get a nice offer for that number two pick? Do you feel like there's a quarterback that's there? Do you feel like you're going to have to like make sure you're taking Marvin Harrison Jr. there because Chicago is lurking? I think what we saw in this game was a lot of with the positives of Justin Fields to be able to be a starter in the league. He isn't a guy I think who is a higher end starter. Like we still can at least say that he only threw for 170 yards, but on the ground he was able to effectively kind of put Arizona away in the second half. They would have probably blown the Cardinals out bigger if the Cardinals didn't have I believe it was Jalen Thompson pick, but he did have I don't think his long rushing stat. Let me double check at least what it was here. We had a a long rushing attempt of 39 yards. That was one where he kind of broke the coverage, came over through, was able to kind of weave his way through traffic, pick up a long first down. He rushed for 97 yards in the game, was almost 100 yards against Arizona's defense, got 5 yards a carry. He did have one rushing touchdown as well that was pretty. As soon as it kind of hit the corner and the edge, I knew he was going to get in. Arizona just didn't have a guy on that side who's able to get to there in time. He only completed 55% of his passes, but we're also talking about Cole Kmet left with injury in that game. DJ Moore on the very first play of the game effectively got a seemed like it was a ankle sprain. He did come back, did not have his best game of the season, but by that point, with Cole Kmet getting the two large, deep passes, boxing his man out, the damage had been done. I think that you could make an argument either way to move on to a different quarterback. I think that a lot of people said the same thing about Kyler Murray. The difference being Fields has not gotten to that third year. He hasn't gotten that big payday yet. Do you feel like the Chicago Bears are in a place where they're going to just take Marvin Harrison Jr. away from Arizona and stick with him? Or do you feel like that Fields is kind of proving himself and we may need to think about things a little bit differently in Chicago at the top of the draft?
It's just a lot of pressure on that front office from what I keep hearing that it's one of those situations where you'd much rather have the front office take like somebody like Caleb or maybe even Drake May, but I would believe Caleb would be the pick and making sure that you select him, and if he fails. But it's like from what we're getting at, where like the film and like the prospect and what is Caleb Williams is like, hey, this guy's supposed to be the next for sure thing at quarterback. You pass up on him. You run the risk of him going somewhere else. And if he goes somewhere else, well, obviously he goes somewhere else and he becomes Caleb Williams, like the person they expect. That front office does then just set their franchise back like maybe another not another generation, another era. And it could get a general manager fired. And I mean, it would be nice for them to have Marvin Harrison Jr., but Justin Fields' problems and his ascension, like, has to be with not only another team, but it's not something where, like, hey, a Marvin Harrison will help, ascend them more. DJ Moore is a great wide receiver, and we've seen him ascend Justin Fields, but not to the point where we're talking about him being like a full time starter yet. We still have question marks about it. If you have any type of question marks about a quarterback and you're sitting there at number one and you have these quarterbacks that are supposed to be like, at least prospect wise, the next big thing and whatnot, then it's hard for them to just justify like taking Marvin Harrison Jr. over Caleb Williams. So I don't know if I'm too worried about. I think it's a lot of banter between the Chicago Bears fans, which I heard is toxic as hell right now because of the Civil War. Um, but I
The
don't think there's anything.
debate has been crazy with some people being like, I would die for Justin Fields. Other people like, Justin Fields is dying so that Caleb Williams can be our guy. Other people are just like, just trade the pick for the most part, get someone else there. That way you're able to say, no matter what happens, there is, like you said, it's very much like the uh, Kyler Murray versus Josh Rosen type of arguments that were happening where we don't know exactly what was going to happen when the Cardinals did make the move. We know that in hindsight, yeah, they made the right move. With Chicago fans, it's definitely one of the similar places to see because they haven't had a lot of talent around Justin Fields until this year, and he has been producing, at least so far, the best year of his career. Now, it's not passing up as far as the rushing yards as far as last year.
Mhm.
He rushed for oh gosh, it was a over 1,000 yards at least rushing that he had in 2022. Ran for about 7.1 yards a carry. He also ended up with almost 1,200 yards total. He was not able to pass at least at the level that most NFL teams were, and the Bears were just losing games left and right. This year it is interesting because so far the Bears have played through, I would say it's been 15 games that they've played through, and Fields is thrown for about, let me double check here. It's going to be 2146 yards total. And with the 15 games, it's about 143 yards a game. Whereas if you're like, okay, well, how does that compare to like standard quarterback, what someone will do? Kyler's sitting between like the 220s to 240s. So you're talking about 100 additional or so yards that Fields has been. Now, he, of course, has run for a lot more this year. Kyler, we know at least, was running for a lot more in that 2020 year where he was being viewed as an early MVP candidate. Um, Fields has this year run for 420 yards. Now, a lot of the issues with Chicago's passing game has been they can put up points in the first half when sticking to the script. But in the second half, teams at least have changed their adjustments. Chicago's defense has had to try to stop some teams that have blown about fourth quarter leads. I think it's a place where what I would do in that spot is I would move off of Justin Fields because you can still probably get a decent pick for him. You're able to recognize that one of Drake May and Caleb Williams is probably going to be having a higher floor as a passer than Justin Fields would, to the point where by 2025, you're at least looking at what would be a significant upgrade and still using that rookie quarterback contract. The concern some fans have had is, well, what happens if you bring in a rookie? The Bears are in more of a win now mode. We don't know if they're going to keep their head coach Matt Eberflus, if they're going to move on. We do have a pretty good sense that Ryan Poles, it doesn't seem like his job is in danger. If Montez Sweat had not worked out, maybe there would be more talk of that. I think that we're in a place where the Bears probably are in that spot of, I would say you need to just get the new coach in, get a new couple of people and have someone take over the defense. They're kind of in a no man's land, similar to where Arizona was with Kyler Murray, Cliff Kingsbury, and Steve Keim, where you're like, okay, we feel sold on some of the pieces, but not all. Do we need to clean house and build around the quarterback? Do we move the quarterback out, but then keep the players who are here with a new coach? This is also a guy that they did not draft in Justin Fields, similar to the Cardinals. Their front office didn't originally draft Kyler Murray. They've at least been able to rally around him. I think that the biggest question we'll have here is, do the Bears have confidence in Justin Fields? And I would say probably not to the level that you would say is that they will say, oh, yeah, this is our guy. We're moving into next year. We're trading down from this pick again. I think the question then is, do the Cardinals have the confidence in Kyler Murray because they're picking second? Do you feel the confidence in Kyler Murray is closer to someone like a Justin Fields where Arizona could move on? Or is this confidence closer to maybe the Bears last year where they were trading down despite seeing the number one pick? What are your thoughts, at least, Marcos, on where Arizona would be, especially after this Chicago game in which the Cardinals offense struggled?
I think the front office, especially since they were brought on, I think the main idea was like, hey, we're bringing you on because we want to fix the team and get them to a point where we were back in 2021, offensive wise, where Kyler Murray was a MVP type of front runner for like half the season. And I think they will move on. I mean, they will move forward with Kyler Murray because I think they just want to give him more of a different type of like different type of tools around him to see if that you know ascends his his ability to be able to take this offense, and not only that but give him a full off season so they can get more acclimated, because as we can see there's still a lot of parts of Kyler Murray's game that is still predicated on the spread and him being the shotgun, and little by little they're incorporating more of like the under center action and even implementing some motion. They're still not doing a lot of motion at the snap, which is what a Shanahan type of offense looks like full blown. But I think that's what they need to work on first and foremost. But their target is on Marvin Harrison Jr. If that is the case, like somebody like Marvin can not only get drafted and develop chemistry with Kyler Murray during the offseason, but be that guy that, Kyler Murray, let's be real, Kyler Murray has always needed that alpha, X receiver that they put opposite side of the bunch formation, not the guy that's in the bunch formation, the guy that's away from the bunch formation where he's one on one with his own wide receiver. Because when we had DeAndre Hop,
That X
yep,
receiver, basically, yeah.
and we had DeAndre Hopkins. Like DeAndre Hopkins was so good and so physical that Kyler Murray knew either to throw a back shoulder to him and he would always be open, or that he would adjust and catch the ball. And we need that replacement right there in order to get back to that offense where even if they're not moving the sticks by the concepts, they're moving the sticks by the talent and Kyler Murray's ability to be able to like get that chemistry going with that one receiver to keep moving, keep the ball moving.
No, definitely agree, Marcos. This is a play that I'm going to share at least. It shows a little bit at least of this is some of the pros and some of the cons at least that we're seeing of Arizona's wide receiver state. This play right here is actually going to be on a. Oh, let me get this keyed up here so we can get that down in distance. It's going to be first down and 10 after the second and 4, I should say. They did a little check down to McBride. This is going to be a deep shot up at the top of your screen to Michael Wilson. He's working out of the slot over here. You're actually able to see he's going to bait this safety with an inside route and then go outside to be able to hit that route. They at least were able to pull the coverage. Kyler throws the ball and it ends up going behind him, and they do not call for a flag. It's an underthrown deep ball. To me, Marcos, when you look at this one in the game, it looks like maybe he was trying to throw it back shoulder, but in the actual all 22, we can see this looks like it's an underthrown deep ball from Kyler Murray. If he puts it out in front of him, he's probably able to get a touchdown here. Kyler also is falling away, I think, at least, with some of the pressure that you can see in his face here. We'll show at least a little bit more from the first end zone angle. All right, so the first end zone angle, you can see here that they're setting up at least with the play. Um, he's at least getting a snap off pretty quick. James Conner's in there for pass protection. And there's a hand up there, but Kyler at least is there. He just doesn't get enough air on this ball, whether that's the placement for the back shoulder. Either way, I think this is just one of those things at least that you'll need to see from Kyler is he's going to have to get more accurate with his deep ball. And I think he knows that. This is something that we've seen that deep ball since that 2020 and 2021 season where he was among the league leaders in deep ball accuracy. It really fell down in terms of accuracy and even deep attempts. Like he wasn't even throwing deep in 2022. One of the things we saw with Hollywood Brown, I would imagine he'd be a field stretcher, being able to get open deep. That ended up not being the case. What I do think at least is interesting is you see how the ball goes in the spot where only Michael Wilson's able to get a hold of it after a while. But it's still one of those areas of an over-the-top shoulder throw versus back shoulder, and you don't really want to reward wide receivers and quarterbacks for underthrown balls like that. At least I don't think that you should. The defender at least doesn't actually get to the ball until it's there late. He goes for the hands. It's, I think, at least a fair call. But it is one of those places, at least, of you then talk about the next play for the Arizona Cardinals on 3rd and 5. And this is the one, at least, where you can say, at least, that this is a play call that I really liked from Arizona. So you get to see some
Mm-hmm.
of the good here. This is the, of course, not quite mesh concept, but it's like longer type of concept to Dortch. And he just basically makes their covering linebacker and the safety just erases them from the play. These are all sorts of like what you call Kyle Shanahan types of plays that kind of come out of the some of that air raid system. These are one of the plays that you can see here. They just get the one defender into conflict. He's having to now catch up underneath and watch where Trey McBride exactly goes on this type of mesh. He just kind of is able to pull up the one guy enough at least where now you've got a linebacker on Greg Dortch. So you're picking up that first down. You're clearing stuff out. They're also bringing a couple of extra men, so Kyler's very quickly able to hit the guy on the crossing route over the middle of the field. These are just some of those bread and butter plays in the NFL where you're able to pick up a quick first down. And then after that, it's up to the receiver. Does he get the first down on the sticks? He has the change of direction to get back and then cuts inside. The guy who's covering the receiver completely gets sucked in while he's two upfield from that play fake. And Dortch is basically able to just get that ball all the way to the end zone. This is one of those areas where you talk about like one of the things we thought we'd see from Rondale Moore with using that speed and that burst, and instead we're seeing Greg Dortch be the one at least who in this spot he's able to make the man miss, and then he just puts a foot in the ground, cuts the opposite direction. Safety isn't able to flip his hips around quick enough. These are plays of where when you're talking about encouragement from the Cardinals receivers, I think we've seen, hey, if there's guys you're bringing back next year, we've seen Trey McBride start to turn into a star. He was banged up in this game. We've seen Hollywood Brown now go onto IR. And we've seen guys like Greg Dortch who've proven his case for making it back and coming back to maybe even being a starting slot role with Arizona for next year. At least probably has shown more than Rondale Moore in terms of just being able to be effective in how he's, when he gets the ball, he just was made able to make plays in the open field.
Yeah, I completely agree with that sentiment, especially since it's kind of funny to think that like Rondell Moore and Hollywood Brown are 4-3 speedsters, and Greg Dortch is the one who's getting not only these type of production, but he's also making up for yards. We've seen this before from Greg Dortch, especially last year, like where he caught the ball in stride, which is good. You want to put the ball ahead of him so that he can continue with his route. And then he creates for the rest of it and makes it a touchdown. So that's not something those are intangibles that he has that like I just feel fully confident that Greg Dortch should not leave this roster next year. And I would only feel confident with just having him and Mike Wilson back for next year because I think if you continue to trot out people like Rondell Moore and of course we know Hollywood shut down for the rest of the season, so it's not looking good for him. You're just taking away snaps from somebody that like can man that slot position, and he can even play some on the outside, but and then be somewhat effective because he's just that good of a route runner. And route running right now is what dominates
Yeah, and this is a spot where I don't even feel like this is like as much of a route running type of area. This is a good play design, especially
playmaking.
against this coverage where you've got one, two, three, four, five, six guys that are there. There's one deep safety over the middle, so you know that they're bringing an extra man on the blitz. How do you beat the blitz in the NFL? You throw to where they're blitzing from. You can at least see right here in the play ahead of time. They've got blitzers right up in the middle. So then do you bring the blitz or do you drop back in coverage? So you can at least see Arizona's at least got everything set up for the most part. Kyler's got the players in motion. If they're going to blitz up the middle, you need to throw over the middle. That's one of the things we've had with Kyler is because of him being a shorter quarterback. You can see here he does some slight, subtle footwork where he's able to kind of drift a little bit over and then just hits Dortch at least on there, stays strong there, and while their blitz protection is even stronger. Like you can just see right here, you've got essentially one, two, three, four, five guys. Each guy has his man up tight. James Conner picks up the blitzer. This is a good blitz pickup at least. The guys are occupied where Greg Dortch is able to get the ball. These are what you kind of call, and I think I jokingly have called these like these are like the Kyle Shanahan quarterback types of plays where you're like, man, why is it Kyler has to make these tough throws into tight windows while the likes of a Jimmy Garoppolo seems to just hit open guys? That's what these type of plays at least are all about for the most part with being able to take advantage of when a defense shows a blitz, being able to know here's our already kind of pre-planned thing we're going to have, knowing to throw into the blitz. Something that was helpful with Kyler is the pre-snap recognition of all the guys that are there on the line, being able to have essentially a lot of guys across the different sides of the field. It's not just the straight four verts, at least that we saw with Cliff Kingsbury. He's able to get the ball, and then of course with having deep speedsters like Hollywood Brown, we've seen him be able to shake guys loose. He's not been able to be as healthy with his foot this year. I think one of the things, at least with Rondale Moore, that we haven't talked as much about has been you don't necessarily have to look at a guy of being a 4-3 speedster to say, hey, this is a guy who can get open and can separate. You also have to look at their total ability as an athlete. And Rondale, one of the things at least coming out was you saw that 4-3 speed. We've seen him when he's been able to get separation over the top has been fine. One of the things I think at least that we haven't seen as much is he's been able to make quick cuts, but we haven't seen him be able to have like that type of stop and start and move again that we have from a Greg Dortch who isn't as fast but has had a lot better change of direction. So I think that's one of the cases we can say is, hey, we are really sold on the speed of Rondale Moore, but without the size to go with it. He's probably more of a straight line athlete than a Greg Dortch, and I think that's part of when you're going to move forward. I think the other thing you can say is Michael Wilson's large enough to be able to block guys. Greg Dortch is not large enough to be able to block guys. That's something at least that we have to factor in into the evaluation of this scheme with the receivers for Arizona is the two tight ends blocking. You're going to probably need to get some size at receiver, and really we probably aren't seeing Hollywood be good enough to be able to man the outside at all times. Same with Rondale. You're probably looking at a lot of these guys as slot only. Well, when you've got a lot of slot receivers, like what Steve Keim was building with the Cardinals, and not a lot of outside guys, you're probably in a place at least where you're looking at needs for Cardinals. Wide receiver continues to be up there. I felt like this was a game in which, with some of the things we saw from Michael Wilson, some of that separation just was not happening from the Cardinals receivers on the outside. I think that's part of where a Marvin Harrison Jr. does at least show up for Arizona and why it does. But we'll talk about that here a little bit more. Let's talk for now about the other big news of the week. It's going to be Marco Wilson is actually released by the Arizona Cardinals. He essentially gets claimed by the Patriots, calls it like one of the best days of his life, one of the best. He called it the best organization in the league. They did win the past week, Marcos. They at least were able to work their way out of the number 2 draft spot. Marco is now with the Patriots, and it'll be interesting to see how he's used, if he even is able to play in the last few games for the Pats, because this is one of those Steve Keim picks where he had all of the physical tools, he had all of the production to at least seem like he could be an outside corner who could maybe even not cover number ones, at least cover number 2 guys. And yet it still ends up being a spot where it wasn't as bad as the Brandon Williams pick where he wasn't playing, but we really saw that he was an athlete. He was able to have pieces that you put together to being a cornerback, but he just wasn't a football player in terms of being able to be that guy you could depend on. And this year, he just had a lot of yards given up. Like, he would be very quickly baited. Yards would be given up. You can even say with the tackling and some of the run game for the most part, like, that was one of the areas where it felt like it was pretty easy for the Cardinals to make the decision to move on.
Yeah, especially once they benched him, it was kind of like a foregone conclusion. And his reaction to it either tells me that he's being spiteful or that there was something going on with like the scheme just not fitting to what is he likes. Because I mean, it happens with a lot of organizations when they change over like the coaching staff. The coaching staff will have people that they like and people who they favor, and they're gonna just say, you know what, I don't want this guy isn't fitting my scheme. He's not, running the drills as I expected him to. He's not performing like I would want him to. So they just make the easy decision to be able to just replace him and whatnot, or just in this situation, release him. And of course, he gets released and gets claimed by New England. It could work out for Marco Wilson if Bill Belichick continues to be the head coach there, or if they at least have that same philosophy there. Because for some reason, New England like to they're able to make their cornerbacks at least look really good on like PFF grades and on film to some degree. So if he's going to learning from New England, like the organization's great, unless Bill Belichick gets fired and then they go the offensive route. But it was kind of like I'm not sure if it was too surprising how his reaction was, because Marco Wilson always seemed to have a chip on his shoulder. He always seemed like he always wanted to, like he's always been in that situation where he's been like needing to prove himself constantly. And so when he had this reaction, of course, he was getting a bunch of backlash for the last for the season, and of course, because his performance on the field just wasn't good enough to be able to say, "Hey, you are somebody who's ascending." Whereas, like, you either stay stagnant or you're starting to regress when it comes to like your coverage skills. So, what happened? Do you just not like this organization? Do you not like the coaching staff? Did the coaching staff rub you the wrong way, or was the coaching staff already planning on moving off from you, and you just weren't wanting to give that effort? So it's kind of sad, because at least for the last 2 years, towards the end of the season, he was looking like he was gonna be like somebody that was ascending to be like at least a like productive starter for the Cardinals.
Yeah, no question. A lot of us I know had wondered if he would end up back with Vance Joseph. I think what we saw from him, unfortunately, was the best football that Marco Wilson played ultimately was when he had a top number 1 corner on the other side of him. And I think that was in the beginning of the 2022 season when Byron Murphy was shutting down different corners when they were playing good defense, at least, and the offense was just atrocious. We got to at least see a bit of Marco Wilson's upside, but when it came to him having to kind of be the guy, it wasn't a good fit. And there were times also where he would basically bite on enough play action to parts where Jamar Chase would get loose on him, to the spot where after a while he just kept being a guy that was targeted again and again. Teams would run at him, and it just felt like he knew he was done in Arizona. He didn't end up putting up the effort. They ended up moving on to younger guys since they knew they weren't bringing him back. And that's a bummer because you'd like to see him be able to respond better instead of just trashing the organization on the way out. This is the guy who threw that shoe in that football game at least all those years ago at
Hmm.
Florida. And when it came to being a culture fit, that was one of the guys who I didn't know if he would be a culture fit or not for the Cardinals. And at the end of the day, you're looking at it and saying, hey, if you're talking about a good news, it's that the Cardinals at least can move forward because if this season's been about, are you on the roster next year or are you not? Are you our guy or are you not? It felt like you're at least the positive is you know that the Cardinals are not going to be moving ahead here with Marco Wilson. And it doesn't seem to be much of a decision that fans are objecting to now. As far as for other decisions, there is another couple of big ones here, which is going to be talking about the likes of Hollywood Brown. So we've got two other players to IR this week as well in the news, Hollywood Brown and Jonathan Ledbetter to the injured reserve. And I have to say, Marcos, it does feel like Hollywood Brown, if he does come back to Arizona, it would probably be on a 1 year deal, a 1 year, $8 million type of a deal. That's something that I think that Cardinals fans would probably be okay with. You would probably lean on saying, let's have him come back, be in more of a slot type of a role where you'd be able to have him be on the outside, maybe as the Z or the flanker, having the um, kind of X receiver be Marvin Harrison Jr., and then having Michael Wilson be on the other side. That all seems to make a lot of sense. What doesn't, I think, seem to make a lot of sense, though, is going to be if that's something that Hollywood would be okay with. Is he going to stick with the likes of Kyler Murray, even if there are teams that are looking to pay him a bit more? And one of the things that we've had kind of conversations, at least with some of this, the person I think who has had the most question marks, at least about some of this, has been Josh Norris over at Underdog Fantasy. He's the guy who's had Colt McCoy on his podcast. We've had some back and forth because he's a Panthers guy, watching with what the Panthers have been having this year, looking at the wide receiver market, looking at it in terms of production for guys who they're going to get in free agency, how that will determine their usage. And here's what he's had to kind of say, at least with the Hollywood Brown contract extension. With him being on season ending IR, that heel injury, he's like, this is interesting. He's got the most juice of the available free agents. It's going to draw some money. Arizona, on the other hand, needs receivers. So, like, will they pay him this? Like, I think the title I've heard has been 3 years, $50 million or so. You're looking at probably about maybe 30 million guaranteed, where it's going to be about probably 15 to $16 million a year guaranteed. You'll lock him up for a while. We've seen him be able to be used as an outside receiver who can get open. He's a guy who can do well in finding a soft spot in the zone against coverage. And he was a number one when the Cardinals did not have the likes of DeAndre Hopkins. Like, he was looking on pace for 1,000 yards and was producing really well. I think that's one of the areas, unfortunately, with Cardinals you have to question about is there value in just saying he's got that 1 year prove it deal and that fills a hole, or do you look at this market and say he's going to be there? Now, one of the comments here is Hollywood over the top with Rashee Rice underneath for the Chiefs, and so that speed's going to be a major draw. The other name that people have talked about, at least, has been T. Higgins as being a free agent, possibly. I have felt like, at least, if you're looking at wide receivers, T. Higgins is a guy who could probably be a number one, more contested catch. He's not the superstar level that Jamar Chase is. I just think that it makes a lot more sense for the Bengals to franchise tag him, whether or not it's for keeping for one more year, making a push knowing that Joe Burrow was hurt, or you say he's too valuable of an asset to just let hit free agency and get a third round comp pick back for him. Why not franchise him, keep him, and then just trade him to another team at least? Because someone's probably going to offer a second round pick for the likes of a T. Higgins because there are a lot of needy wide receiver teams that are out there. I think that's more likely to happen. And I think also we can say, Marcos, we're pretty sure the Cardinals would not be franchise tagging Hollywood Brown, right?
I don't think so. I my issue and the conundrum with Hollywood Brown with me is that takes away snaps away from like somebody that I do want to see on the field, which is Greg Dortch. So like if we do keep him on that 1 year deal, it just kind of pushes Greg Dortch's snap counts down. Where I feel like Greg Dortch does better with the type of position that Hollywood Brown would be playing if we relegate him to like the at least the number two or the number three for that matter, and it also takes away snaps from possibly giving a better, role for Michael Wilson, because Michael Wilson does have that 50-50 catch ability at least. And that's something that like we've seen is important to someone like Kyler Murray, because he will have to throw some balls where the wide receiver is going to have to track him and then have like hands all over his body as or draped all over his body as he's going up to try to catch the ball. And when we've seen Hollywood Brown those same type of snaps with just the smallest iteration of just tugging or touching or anything like that, he's made like possibly like two or three that I can remember out of all these contested catches where I'm like, I don't think he's catching that ball if it's getting thrown to him, unless he does what he did. I believe when was it like against the Los Angeles Rams where he turned the corner around and he was wide open on that, like, being able to catch that. And I'm not talking about wide open as in like he was open. I mean, he just was untouched. Like, unless it's something like that in that circumstance, I don't think he's coming down with it. And I don't trust his health either. He
Yeah.
has been somewhat like injury prone these last two seasons, and regardless or not, we still gave a first round pick for a guy who we were expecting to like at least produce more than 700 yards or at least more than like 800 yards. We were thinking, oh well, he's an upgrade over Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk already had a 1,000 yard season in his first year away from the Cardinals. Meanwhile, Hollywood Brown can't even crack that because of the fact that like he just can't stay healthy, or just teams know what his game is all about.
Yeah. And I think that the other question, at least is from Charles Coriel. Thanks for tuning in, Charles. Is why is it that we would be looking at a 1 year deal versus letting him go? The value is more of you at least have a position filled where you're not having to then say, all right, so for this next year, we've got a rookie who's going to be going over there and taking over for either Greg Dortch in the slot or who knows the offense. If you're going to have to start from scratch, it's going to be difficult. We've seen that with in his last year, Aaron Rodgers, with all of those young wide receivers, they really struggled in Green Bay to be able to put everything together. I do think that what Arizona did was they made a mistake. I think if they were going to keep Hollywood Brown, because when they made the trade, guys are going to get more expensive even with the cap going up. I felt like if you're making the trade for Hollywood, you're seeing him as part of your future. You see him as your number one, then you're going to be saying, hey, we're going to basically sign this guy. He'll pair with D Hop. We'll let DeAndre Hopkins go, draft a guy to replace him while keeping Hollywood Brown. That was, I think, some of the team building. The fact that they traded for him and didn't sign him was partially, I think, a place of it made Kyler at least glad to have his best friend over, but it didn't necessarily help the Cardinals do anything more other than trying to kind of win now. And with the Hopkins suspension, we at least were able to see the upside. We also saw the 6 weeks worth of injury. We've seen him at least struggle to be available and playing through some of this injury. And in the NFL, we got to remember that health is wealth, and you have to also be able to say, that availability is the best thing you can have at a prospect. No one cares how fast you can run. You could run a 4.24, but if you pull your hammy every single time you're running downfield, doesn't matter how good you are. That's something that I think we've seen with Michael Wilson coming back from the injury. He has not been nearly as effective as he was before, and for better or for worse, there's a rookie wall that guys can hit. But he previously had been in a good spot where he was at least at some point picking up, I think it was versus San Fran. He had the 2 touchdowns, 76 yards. Against the Rams, he had 3 of 4 catches. Even in Seattle, he at least was able to get a few catches for the most part before the Baltimore game. He has not really clicked with Kyler Murray the same way as he did before. He got hurt, I believe, after the Atlanta game. Since he's been back, he actually has as many yards as you and I do, Marcos. He has no catches on 7 targets. He's not been able to get open. It's a place where he is going to be, unfortunately, a question mark heading into next year, where you'd like to say that spot is checked off. But the fact that it's not means you're probably going to have to bring in an outside veteran to be able to at least challenge him for that spot, hoping that Michael Wilson could be able to be that guy. Zach Pascal has not been able to be that guy. It's part of with Michael Wilson getting a lot of playing time is they signed him to a 2 year deal and it really hasn't fit. And so I think as we kind of are looking at for what we have coming up in our kind of preview of the Eagles game, the biggest thing that comes down to it is going to be what do you do if the Cardinals lose out and get that number 2 pick? One of the things I think that you have to talk about, of course, is going to be what in the world do you do if the Panthers win out. So there is at least an interesting scenario for the most part with the Cardinals where if the, and this is something we can pull at least straight from tankathon.com, the Patriots got a win this past week with Bailey Zappi. Essentially, was able to drive down and get the Patriots a win up against the Denver Broncos. This is essentially the win that sent Russell Wilson to whatever you want to call it, the doghouse of Sean
Stratosphere.
Payton, as well as not just that doghouse for, you know, on-field reasons, but also he has his contract, which essentially, if he gets hurt and injured, he's going to be owed a ton of money immediately starting the next season if he can't pass a physical. It's too risky for them to put him out there and have any sort of injury, so he's now sitting on the bench. And this is something that we had looked at Sean Payton, I think, for a lot of Cardinals fans, as being that coach coming into this season. He just has not, I think, been what a lot of people had wondered about, of being this, okay, he's the tough coach who's going to bring offense, they're going to perform, he may fix Russell Wilson. We've seen at least that there's been a lot more drama with Sean Payton, unfortunately. And one of the things that's been behind it has been a lot of people who are players like, hey, like, they're not honoring their end of the contract. They're not trying to win games for the most part. He's been a guy that really at least has had people take Russell Wilson's side. And we're forgetting, like, this is the Russell Wilson who players were speaking negatively about overall, which is wild, I think. One of the things I think it was pointed out was at least one of the areas of, and this is maybe this is just the relationship you have when you are a longtime NFL head coach versus being a guy who is, still making his way up. But this is one of the tweets that was sent out from a Sean Payton press conference, at least here from Chris Thomason. Said, hey, like, this is part of the deal with the criticism he faces. Sean Payton even ended the press conference thanking the media for wishing him a happy birthday, even though they didn't. So I was like, oh yeah, but thanks for wishing you a happy birthday, guys. And so you're like, oh, okay, kind of a jerk move there. And that was something at least we'd heard about with people before the season was, yeah, Sean Payton's going to be a kind of a jerk. Like, that's one of the things that's going to come with him. The Broncos at least haven't been winning as much as we thought, and we've really seen he probably wanted to move on from Russell Wilson when he came in. He obviously is the boss there. It makes me feel at least better about Jonathan Gannon moving forward somewhat, and it also makes me look at the fact that the Cardinals are now in this position here. There's 2 games left in the NFL season. The Carolina Panthers lose by a field goal to the Packers. They're still on track to have that number 1 pick with a 2-12 record. Even if they win a game, their strength of schedule at 5-17 is going to be ultimately higher, at least within Arizona. The 2024 draft order, as of right now, has Arizona at 562. They win a game, they're going to be moving from the 2nd pick to basically the 4th pick, because Washington would jump up and New England would jump up because of that strength of schedule. Even if Carolina wins, they have a weaker strength of schedule than Arizona, which means Cardinals would still pick 2nd. However, if the Panthers end up beating the Jaguars this week, who are not going to have Trevor Lawrence. He's already ruled out, so it's a backup quarterback. The Jaguars have not looked very good with Trevor Lawrence. The next week they play the Buccaneers. If the Buccaneers see the Falcons lose this next week, you can see here with the Buccaneers, they're at 8-7. If they have a chance to win at 9-7, they could end up claiming the playoffs, at least for the most part, with an Atlanta loss at 7-9. They would not be able to make it that far. If Atlanta wins, then it's another week at least that Tampa Bay would keeping their starters. But at least the way that it's set up for right now, there's a chance, Marcos, that let's say that the Falcons do lose that game. The Buccaneers now are in the playoffs. They've already won 4 in a row. There's a chance, Marcos, that the Panthers could face the Buccaneers without any of their starters, and because they're resting guys for the playoffs, all of a sudden you're like, oh, could the Panthers actually win that game too? That would flip the script, where all of a sudden, if the Carolina wins out and the Cardinals lose out to 2 teams who are in the playoffs, and the Eagles, and trying to make it in Seattle, Cardinals could potentially have the number 1 pick. Now, Carolina loses one single game of that, it's over. Chicago will pick first overall. What would be your thoughts if the Cardinals happen to get to the end of the season and it's Arizona who's picking first and not Chicago? What would be your thoughts at least on that? Because that feels like it would upset everything of what we were expecting the draft order to be.
Yeah, it would basically throw the order into chaos because could you imagine all the storylines and everything that would be talked about during the offseason if we get the number one overall pick? The Caleb talks would just not end. The question would be like, hey, is Kyler Murray even like ascending in this type of offense? Does he even work in this type of offense? The comparisons would start, the analytical point of view where they would start focusing on like Kyler Murray and how he's done in this offense and like, just the weapons around him and whatnot. Like it would just be nonstop in that situation. And I mean, if I was Kyler Murray, I would not want to be in that situation where my team is at the number one overall pick and, somebody like Caleb Williams is sitting there because it is a tempting situation. But I do think that even if that was the case, even if the narratives do hit, I think they would try to package that and allow a team to hopefully like go into a bidding war and move up to that spot. Which is why, like to me, I thought it was just simplistic just to hopefully stay on number three, so there's no option, and we know who is sitting there at number three if that's possible. And if you're there at number one overall, I mean, you could still take your guy in Marvin Harrison Jr. But why would you do that if you have these two quarterbacks that teams are possibly going to want to trade up for? Now, of course, you're going to not want to trade out of the possibility of not getting Marvin Harrison Jr. But even if that were the case, I would imagine it would be another situation where another first round pick would become available for next year for the Cardinals to help set up a rebuild. You can give like another year to see if this offense is working out, to see if this defense is getting better, because I would assume that they're going to add a ton of pieces to the defense and see where this goes overall, and then possibly take a crack at a quarterback next year if it doesn't end up working out as far as like, Kyler Murray and taking up this offense. So it's going to be chaos if we take that if we have that number one overall pick.
Yeah, it'll also be one of the places, and this is kind of what I said coming into the season was people are grading and evaluating Kyler, and it wasn't a fair grade or evaluation. It was the team in a lot of ways had almost been set up for him to fail because you're trading away Hopkins. You don't have a lot of receivers. You're still having to build together an offensive line. They didn't abandon it completely. Like he still had Hollywood Brown, he still had Trey McBride. Obviously, he's coming off of the ACL. They at least were able to bring in another starter who wasn't just throwing Clayton Tune out there to lose 50-0 every single game. But it is a question of did the Cardinals put Kyler Murray in this spot because they were looking to potentially move off from him? And if that's the case, at least that's one of the questions, at least, of has Kyler played good enough this year for the Cardinals to say, hey, this is our guy moving forward? And it's like there's people already talking about it. It's one of those cases, at least, that it could be a spot because Kyler hasn't won enough games for them to be out of the competition for the number one or number two pick. It is a spot also too of you also can look at it and say, hey, look, like they knew they were taking a down year. If they're rolling ahead with Kyler and would take the likes of a Marvin Harrison Jr. or, like you said, look at packaging picks, trading back, I think it is an interesting factor of looking at what would be what Monty Ossenfort would be thinking about with Kyler Murray because he didn't draft the likes of a Kyler Murray. Obviously, Jonathan Gannon and others have sold that they feel like he's a guy who can be the franchise quarterback. And I think then it comes down to is what is the right decision? What would Monty Ossenfort do? If he's in a place where he can get more draft picks and trade back, I agree with you that that's something he would like to do. But it also is a place where, hey, if you're sitting there and you've got a grade on Drake May that's higher than the likes of a Kyler Murray, or obviously, let's say that you think Caleb Williams is the next best thing since sliced bread, regardless of how this past season has gone for him, that if you end up in the number one pick, there's going to be a lot of pressure on people to have that same thing with Chicago of, hey, like, are you really going to keep Kyler Murray and then trade away at least the picks that someone else takes on to Caleb Williams? There's going to be a lot of questions. And I was with you on, if you pick third overall, super easy to know. Oh, they're picking
Yeah,
third. The first two teams are taking quarterbacks.
simple.
Easy. You take the best player in the draft, Marvin Harrison Jr. You get your Larry Fitzgerald and DeAndre Hopkins replacement, and hopefully you can just trot that guy out for the next 10 to 12 years at least, being able to play at a high level because you need a playmaking alpha receiver. I think the question that comes in is this a team that has basically going to find themselves in a spot where And we can talk about the prospects. At least there'll be plenty of time to talk about the prospects. For all we know, the Cardinals win another game, and we're not talking about it. One thing that you could do, at least from that perspective, as a possibility, is you could take a look at the teams that are here and say, "Hey, we're a Cardinals team at least that we want to stick forward with Kyler. We'll do what Chicago did last year. We can trade back to a team like Washington here at number 3 and still get a Marvin Harrison Jr. We could trade back with New England at 4, knowing, hey, we're going to give up a quarterback pick here. We know that the Chicago Bears, at least, are going to still be picking here in that next slot. Maybe they would then take another quarterback. You're then talking about what's Washington going to do, taking a Marvin Harrison Jr., moving in a different space. Would Washington try to trade back? Maybe I'd just say, hey, we've got a couple of third round picks this year. We just traded back, at least here with New England, who gave us, another pick that they had for the future. Maybe we give up a pick and move up over here with Washington, where we're able to say, hey, Washington, you guys are rebuilding. You kind of need a offensive tackle to take over at left tackle for you guys, right? You also, maybe you're going to move on from another wide receiver. Maybe you take Marvin Harrison Jr. here. We'll settle this for you. You got a quarterback in Jaden Daniels. We'll send you an offensive tackle, at least for the most part, so you guys can take that tackle. And now all of a sudden you're in that spot where you can take a Jaden Daniels, know he'll be protected, and you got extra picks to be able to make a play for another receiver long term if you feel like you want a receiver. Maybe you want to go ahead and use those picks on building up what's been essentially the worst passing defense in the NFL. I think that's a perfectly valid option for Arizona to take. I think if you're in the number 2 spot, there are options of moving around or moving back. It's an option more because of that quarterback that wasn't there at number 3. I think, though, if you are picking the top 2, the question is there a positive in resetting the quarterback kind of rookie deal for the next 3 to 5 years, whoever the quarterback is, versus recognizing, hey, we've got Kyler Murray and his current contract structure is something that is going to be not as easy to move as a Justin Fields. You can see here with how the structure works, at least with each year. The way that it is set up, he makes the most of his base salary next year. The dead cap from straight up cutting him would be 81 million. You'd probably be looking at a cap hit for the most part of about some 51 or so million. I think that they had at least talked about, and this is something we can find from Over the Cap at least, is a good job of with this, of if you've got Kyler Murray and you're going to trade him, you would end up taking at least a big cap hit the first year, and then teams would have to be taking on some of his contract every year. He would end up getting paid a bit more. So here's a good look at that. So you've got,
Mhm.
there. If you trade him at least with the draft, and this would be like looking realistically, pre June 1st would be the trade. You're talking about a $46 million in dead money you couldn't spend. Now, the idea is you take a dead year, but guess what? You've got a rookie quarterback. Instead of making $40 million a year like Kyler's contract is set up at the quarterback spot, you've got $40 million over the next 5 years. So it's not like you would be dooming yourself, but you'd be like, all right, this is just 2023 all over again, just with another quarterback learning the system, having not as much talent around them because you had to pass on a Marvin
Yeah.
Harrison Jr. in order to get that. You're only saving about $5 million in cap room from that cap number. Another team would then be in 2025 having to kind of take on the same areas of 33 million, 20 million dollars at least if they were going to move on. If they're going to see him being cut after that contract is traded, you're taking on 33 million in dead money, and you kind of have something that triggers in the year 2025 and 2026 where these base salaries at least will become guaranteed for the most part at the start of this season. So I think that's where you can at least look at the Cardinals and say, you know what, we can probably look at that deal for Kyler as being a benefit if he plays well. Maybe that's all it needs. You throw in a Marvin Harrison Jr., you're able to see that. Maybe someone can look at that and say, hey, if you're entering next season, you got Marvin Harrison Jr., and let's say Kyler plays as like a top 10 quarterback, but he's not a top 6 or a top 7 quarterback. Is that really going to be worth keeping him at that cost versus saying, hey, he may not be the guy, we're only winning about 7 games next year? That's, I think, a lot of people wondering, should you move ahead to that quarterback now in advance if you were going to be looking at that potentially as an option? You just then wouldn't have a top 2 pick or a top quarterback to be able to choose from. Marcos, so many different things we could get into here is part of with the number 2 pick. It gives more options for Arizona, but also makes things a lot more complicated. What do you think, at least, about just
Right.
someone moving on from Kyler Murray if the Cardinals were going to do that?
It's just tough to do it so soon, and that's what the drawback is to like making the decision. And it wasn't Monty's decision. Monty obviously took over, last year and stuff. So the extensions were given before that. So he inherited this, and what he's probably thinking in his mind is like, if that even was a possibility, the only type of decision that you can make on that is to try to trade Kyler Murray so you can get some sort of like obviously some something in return as far as like picks are concerned and whatnot, and also to make that cap hit like somewhat manageable. And it's just I'm not sure if they're willing to go down that road yet. I think that they would like to be down the road where they either give another year and then see how this works out. Because even in the 6 game sample size or 7 game sample size that we're seeing from Kyler Murray, like it's hard to do a proper assessment, especially I know that I said it takes all these games to be able to do the actual assessment. It's not just a game by game basis where he's good, he's bad, he's good, he's bad. It's just no, as a whole, we're trying to see if there's an ascension, if he's progressing better towards the end of the season. But it's also one of those situations and circumstances where like we're also seeing that like maybe he just doesn't have the tools around him to be able to show that assessment. Because I think somebody put it like they put it really well, and it's Alex Rollins of the Alex Rollins channel. Um, he does really good work when it comes to like film study and like videos. And so in his video, he said that Kyler Murray is a really good one-on-one quarterback or backyard quarterback when it comes to like being able to hit his guy when they're in sync with each other and when he has that chemistry. Thus, when he had someone like DeAndre Hopkins, they were able to move the ball productively because that connection that they had and that trust that they had was very special. Then, when he was out, then he was missing that piece. So then it went devolved back into like, trying to either put somebody to be able to take over that exposition to see if they can have that chemistry,
Mm-hmm.
that one on one. But a lot of what he does is pre snap decisions. He looks at to see where what defenses are giving him. And if he likes his one on one matchup on the outside, you've seen him, throw it off his back foot or just throw it up there and then, hey, I know this guy's going to catch the ball. That's why Trey
Right.
McBride was playing better. What was helping Kyler Murray move the sticks a lot was because he became that receiver as the tight end. He was I'm throwing it up to you because I know I have
Right.
confidence you're going to go up and get it.
No, and I think that's one of the areas, at least, where what I've said is I don't fault the Cardinals if they would move to a Marvin Harrison Jr. because we have at least seen Marv is a guy who can catch a fade ball, who can get open, who's been able to. We've seen Kyler be able to produce with the likes of DeAndre Hopkins in that role. Would be a good fit for the most part, I think, as far as for the player with the skill. Obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr. can fit probably every NFL team. I think the biggest question, of course, is not just the timing, but what do you think about the likes of Kyler compared with these quarterbacks? Because, as we're saying, at least like if the Cardinals try to win, they finish 8-9. Kyler's not able to win the big game. Then, at least as Charles says, this is a top quarterback class. Last year we said, hey, guess what? Bryce Young, he's in the draft. He'll probably be a top 2 pick. CJ Stroud, he may end up being offensive rookie of the year, despite Puka Nakua putting up just crazy numbers with Stafford and the Rams this year.
Yeah.
You were not looking at next year's draft and saying, "Oh, look, there's the next Caleb Williams, there's the next Drake May," like people were last year. You're probably going to be then saying that, hey, you're going to might be sticking with Kyler for 2 years for this because you're going to have to be waiting another year. You maybe would see a guy emerge. I know there's a couple of guys at least early we can talk about, like the likes of JJ McCarthy could come back. He could declare. Quinn Ewers seems like he'll be back at Texas. Carson Beck out of Georgia is probably going to be the top underclassman next year at 6'4", 220. But neither of those guys are really considered to be like the top almost can't miss prospects that those two quarterbacks have been. It's one of the spots where if the Cardinals are in a place where they said, "Hey, you know what? We are going to go ahead and take a quarterback here." It wouldn't shock me because there's a lot of things that you can at least say about these years quarterbacks, but they're a bit taller than Kyler as far as throwing over the middle of the field. We've at least seen that teams have been able to trade quarterbacks, but they're not able to get the most from them. I think it's one of those places where you probably need to make up your decision as the coaching staff, knowing what Kyler is, who he's been within the locker room, how he's been doing, and your confidence in him to be able to say, hey, even if we couldn't get a Marvin Harrison Jr. because we picked third and he went at second, we can still get a receiver for our quarterback and he'll be able to be better next year. And I think that that is one of the places of you probably are better off making that decision this year. If you don't, then here's what I'll say at least for that too. Look, you probably need a Marvin Harrison Jr. if you've got me at quarterback. Like you're gonna want a player like that. He's the best player in the draft no matter what. That's one of those cases, at least, where there's going to be a lot of questions about each of those. I think, at least for right now, the best move for the Cardinals would be knowing your evaluation on Kyler Murray and knowing you probably could use a Marvin Harrison Jr. no matter what. So until things shift otherwise, that will probably be my perspective, just because it's easy for me to be able to say, hey, like we saw Larry Fitzgerald with 4 to 5 different people, at least in his quarterbacking at the first couple years that he was in the league. But it is one of those things of if the Cardinals are picking in the top two, it's going to be a question. And I do think these next few games with Kyler Murray are my hope is it'll make it clear. Like we've seen at least, and this is something I wanted to pull up at least from our own Walter Mitchell as we close out today on Revenge of the Birds. I know we're a little bit
Walter.
over an hour, but we wanted to at least bring up, and this is a good discussion of how much of this Cardinals season is just a bad season no matter who is at quarterback, and how much of this is ultimately a issue at least where the Cardinals, at least with Kyler Murray, have not gotten the same type of production we've hoped for. So here you can see at least this is from the first 6 games with Josh Dobbs, about 6 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Kyler Murray's thrown for more yards, 6 touchdowns more. There have been more guys hurt. Obviously, lack of Hollywood, no Michael Wilson, I think has been a big issue. You can see that the running has been similar. I know Josh Dobbs ran a lot more at first, and then that kind of backed off. Same with quarterback rating and record. So Walter's argument is, hey, he's not any better than Joshua Dobbs. It's not been impressive. You got to move off of him. I know that's one of the perspectives that people can have on Kyler. We at least have had Walter on the show before. I think the biggest thing, of course, is this may have been the stats for a quarterback just regardless, because this is just not a good Cardinals team this year. Do you think that we're in a place at least where the Cardinals, and we're talking about with Kyler Murray, because he hasn't necessarily come in and had the biggest type of impact, like he's still 2-4 in his games at this point now. So like when we were 2 games ago, it's like, all right, Josh Dobbs, you won 1 game with him. You're 2-2 with Kyler Murray. You're maybe playing 500 ball with him. You're now 2-4. Do you think that we could be shifting into a place where if the Cardinals are then 2-6 with Kyler Murray, do you think people are going to be having more wanting to move off of him and falling in love with the quarterback prospect than staying the course, kind of keeping him back in the game? I think that this is one of those questions, at least, where I don't really care what the Cardinals do as much so long as they make the right decision at the end of the day. But what are your thoughts on that as we close out today?
No, I don't envy Monty Ossenfort's decision this offseason. We could both say that we're glad we're not in that position because it is a kind of like a stressful position to be in because it is a big decision. What do you do? Because you don't know what the right move is going to be. You might not even know for another year or so what the move is going to be. What if Caleb Williams does or Drake May become like the next like Justin Herbert who or like the next like Josh Allen and
Yeah.
Patrick Mahomes and whatnot, and you're over here sitting here thinking to yourself, we passed up on that because we wanted to give our quarterback another chance. And what if that does happen? What if they do end up 8-9? What if
Lamar
they
Jackson and the Cardinals as like draft Lamar, and then they're like, oh, we're gonna get Rosen. I'm like, well, he was one of the 3 quarterbacks I liked in that class, and I was wrong on Josh Rosen at least in that spot. I was also wrong on Josh Allen, but I was like, hey, Lamar was like, that's your MVP leader right now, who's already won a unanimous MVP
won an
award.
MVP?
You feel like, man, Cardinals passed on that guy, and it was such a bad miss that like you're looking at a year later, if we're gonna bring in Kyler Murray, not even just because Josh Rosen didn't live up to the expectations, but also you had to come to grips with, man, Josh Rosen is just not a good quarterback prospect. And I think that no one is questioning that the Cardinals made the wrong move back then with Kyler Murray. I think the question people have now is Kyler that guy who's going to get you to that next level or be that elite quarterback, or is he going to be in the middle? And for that matter, it really comes down to how much you think of these quarterbacks, because if the Cardinals do trade away Kyler Murray, bring in a rookie, and they go 8-9 next year, everyone's just kind of like, you made the right move. If the Cardinals have another 3-win season and are picking in the top 3, then a lot of people are going to be like, okay, did you make the right move with this rookie for how he played, or is your roster just so bad that this is going to be a multi-year approach? And for what it's worth, I have felt like that this roster may be a team that you're competing in 2025 versus 2024, because if you take a Marvin Harrison Jr., you're not able to really build up the defense with the pass rush. Maybe you've got more money in free agency. You're hoping that Kyler's able to carry you further. You're hoping a couple of additions are there that you're at least able to kind of be in the playoff picture for a while, if not get into the playoffs at least at that point. I think a lot of it will start again with this game against the Eagles. And Marcos, let's talk at least here real quickly. I have this as like an Eagles game where the Eagles offense has been solid, but not as efficient as it was last year. They haven't been able to run the ball very effectively, and Jalen Hurts has been hampered by injury. And at the same time, on the defensive side, the Eagles seem like they just aged all of a sudden in one offseason. Like Darius Slay's 32. He looks like he's not able to play out there. We saw James Bradbury get old. They even have lost Fletcher Cox is to a 35-year-old. They're just kind of getting long in the tooth like Arizona's defense was, and it hit all at the same time. But even while they've given up points, Arizona's offense has not been able to put up a ton. And playing against a good defense in the Bears last week, they had 16 points. I think the issue is you're going up against the Eagles. It's going to be cold again and on the road. They have Jalen Hurts, who is still playing well. You're going to need to force a turnover in order to stay in this game. And I just don't see the Cardinals able to stop not just the run that the Eagles are able to have, but I think that it could be another big game like we saw last week for Cole Kmet, for the likes of A.J. Brown and or Devonta Smith. I've got the Eagles winning this one. Like I've had it about 34 to 20. I think that the Eagles would probably be able to get out to a 24 something start, get one more later touchdown for the most part after they've eased off the gas. I think if the Cardinals are going to be in this, they'll have to force 3 turnovers, and that's going to be a really interesting thing to have to do if you're Arizona against an Eagles team that is still playing for a top pick, despite maybe not being as good as an 11-4 team should be. They're still, I think, in a different league than the Cardinals right now.
Yeah, the Eagles have not like given me any confidence from what I've seen thus far. I'm actually going 24-20 Cardinals because the
Ooh,
Eagles have had this blueprint put out where it's funny because it almost seems like they were the 2021 Cardinals. And I'm not even saying that to be like, hey, this team was a no, I'm talking about like the offensive scheme. Their offense is static. They use no motion almost. They run almost exclusively from the shotgun. Think about that. Like that's something that's insane because we thought about ourselves as just being shotgun heavy, never wanting to go under center. Well, that's what they do out in Philly. So they kind of like restrict themselves when it comes to the run game into just being able to run anything over the middle because of the fact that they had to hand off the ball from the shotgun, and that pretty much almost eliminates an outside zone, like which is those stretch runs are very productive, and they're just going by just talent when it comes to like offense. Like, hey, Jalen, you're gonna break out of the pocket. You're gonna find AJ Brown somewhere, and he's gonna win. He's gonna be physical, or Devontae Smith will get open, and Dallas Goddard. He's one of the top tight ends out there. So they're just like they're running their offense out of pure talent, and their defense is just bad. Their defense is not what it was last year.
yeah,
They
it's
it
not
comes to show.
great. Not great.
Mm, it comes to show that their defense really did miss all those pieces. And plus, I mean, your cornerbacks are aging. They're not who they used to be. This year, they've taken a big step back. So they're very vulnerable. They've shown on tape that like these guys are really beatable. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Cardinals, especially since Jonathan Gannon, and I know they could be running something different when it comes to scheme and stuff, but I mean, he has some knowledge and that counts for something, especially those players in the locker room who know, yeah, this is the type of scheme that we run. This is what we have to be able to stop. Guess what? You guys are basically defending yourselves back in 2021. So just, with that offensive game plan, just, you got the
Yeah.
blueprint.
Yeah, if you've got the blueprint and you're able to make those plays, I think that would be a spot. And I will say this: that would be the funniest win of the season for the Cardinals. Like the Bears at least was a game that we had hoped the Cardinals would win. Didn't think that they would win another one. But if you had to say, hey, they're going to lose to the Bears, but they're going to beat the Eagles, who clearly they missed what Shane Steichen brought last year in terms of subtlety and being able to have a much more dynamic run game. Hurts being hurt is part of that, but it also feels like on the defensive side, Jonathan Gannon had that team like having sack records of being able to mix up things in the background. They've had Sean Desai back there, and it really didn't work very well to the point where they put Matt Patricia back there. And of course, they were able to at least lose that game somehow, at least the Seahawks against Drew Lock in the late game, at least with just some weird coverages. I think that I agree with you. This could be a game which the Cardinals surprise because they'll be playing for pride with Jonathan Gannon. It'll just be interesting to see. I think the toss up for me in that spot would probably be the road game where I'd lean toward Philly because of it being outdoors in the cold. But we'll get to see if the Cardinals can actually go through and put a shocker together. It would be very funny to look at Eagles fans blaming Jonathan Gannon for the Super Bowl, being upset with him with their defensive coordinator spot. If Arizona would pull off a win, it would be one of the more redeeming, I think, wins of the season for the Cardinals, and just put Eagles fans in a tizzy. They then played the Giants for their last game of the season, and Cardinals will be talking about it next week as far as with their season finale against the Seattle Seahawks. I'm Blake Murphy. That is Marcos Labrada. Marcos, at least, we wrap up at least if you can tell people where your content is being written, and then I'll follow up with mine.
At Pancake Soul, you can find me on X, and of course on AZ Sports Underground. I have some articles in archive, I guess you can say. You can search up just Marcos Labrada, AZ Sports Underground. You should be able to look up my articles that I've written. And obviously, you can find me here on the Redbird Reboot, where we do the best type of podcast when it comes to in-depth analysis and film study.
That's absolutely right. Thank you guys for tuning in here. Make sure you're following at Redbird Reboot. Drop us a like, at least for the most part there. And you guys have a wonderful rest of your holiday season. We'll see you in 2020. Is that 2024, Marcos?
2024.
Time is just flying by
Flying.
like crazy. Absolutely. Take care, guys.
Happy New Year. Be safe.